Wyoming just dumped 500 golden eagles into barren highlands that cattle had chewed down to dust. Sounds insane, right? Releasing apex predators into a landscape that's already struggling? Something impossible started happening. The grass came back, not just a little green fuzz, but thick waist-high meadows, where there hadn't been anything but dirt. And the weirdest part? The cattle that caused the problem in the first place started gaining more weight. Keep watching and find out how nature pulled off the ultimate reverse Uno card. Let's rewind to 2019. Wyoming's red desert highlands looked like the surface of Mars. Over a century of intensive cattle grazing had turned 2.4 million acres into what biologists politely called a degraded ecosystem. Translation? It was wrecked. The soil was so compacted that when it rained, water just ran off. Instead of soaking in, native grasses that once grew shoulder-high were replaced by invasive cheatgrass, which burns faster than a Tesla in a parking garage and offers about as much nutrition to wildlife. Ranchers were struggling too. They needed more and more land to support the same number of cattle because the forage quality had nosedived. It was a slow-motion disaster that everyone could see happening, but nobody knew how to stop. Enter the Wyoming Game and Fish Department with a plan so bonkers that half the ranching community thought they'd lost their minds. The proposal? Reintroduce 500 golden eagles into the region over 5 years. Not for some feel-good conservation Instagram post, but as a functional part of ecosystem restoration. The ranchers weren't buying it. Golden eagles have a 7-foot wingspan and talons that can punch through a coyote's skull. The immediate reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Ranchers already dealing with thin profit margins, and dying grass didn't want apex predators added to their problems. There were town halls, heated ones. You want me to believe that adding more things that can kill my livestock is going to help me? That's like saying the solution to my broken truck is setting it on fire. Fair point. Except the biologists had done their homework, and the answer to how this could possibly work starts with an animal you probably didn't expect. Prairie dogs. Now before you picture cute little rodents standing on their hind legs looking adorable, understand what prairie dogs actually do. They're ecosystem engineers. A single prairie dog town can span hundreds of acres with thousands of animals. They dig, constantly. Their tunnel systems aerate the soil, allowing water to penetrate instead of running off. Their waste fertilizes the ground. They clip vegetation, which sounds bad but actually stimulates new growth and prevents any single plant species from dominating. Here's where it gets interesting. When cattle overgraze an area, prairie dogs move in and thrive. Sounds good, right? Except prairie dog populations without natural predators explode exponentially. A healthy prairie dog town might have 10 to 15 animals per acre. Without predators, that number can hit 50 or more. And at those densities, they're not helping anymore. They're strip mining the landscape. They consume so much vegetation that native grasses can't recover. They outcompete cattle for forage, and their colonies become so expansive that they actually prevent grassland recovery. It's a paradox. The very animals that could help heal the ecosystem become the thing preventing it from healing. Unless something keeps their numbers in check. That something? Golden eagles. A golden eagle doesn't mess around. They hunt during the day, covering up to 200 square miles in a single territory. Their eyesight is 8 times sharper than human vision. They can spot a prairie dog from 2 miles away. And prairie dogs are basically a drive-through menu for them. Convenient, abundant, and just the right size. But golden eagles don't just eat prairie dogs. They also take ground squirrels, rabbits, and occasionally, when the opportunity presents itself, young coyotes and foxes. This is important, because in Wyoming's degraded highlands, coyote populations had skyrocketed, with wolves nearly eliminated from the region decades ago and mountain lions keeping to rockier terrain. Coyotes had free rein, and coyotes love nothing more than newborn pronghorn antelope and mule deer fawns. Wyoming's pronghorn population, once numbering over 1 million, had dropped to around 400,000. Mule deer numbers were in similar decline. Biologists pointed fingers at habitat loss, disease, harsh winters, all true. But predation on fawns by coyotes was a massive, underappreciated factor. In some areas, up to 80% of pronghorn fawns weren't making it past their first month. So Wyoming had a cascade of problems. Overgrazed land, exploding prairie dog populations preventing recovery, coyote populations decimating what little wildlife remained. The eagle reintroduction plan targeted all of it at once. And skeptics thought that was precisely the problem. Too many variables. Too ambitious. Nature doesn't work like some predictable machine where you pull one lever and get the result you want. Except sometimes it does. The first batch of eagles was released in spring 2020. 50 juveniles, each fitted with GPS tracking units, so biologists could monitor their movements, hunting patterns, and survival rates, where populations were stable and could handle the removal without impact. They were acclimated in large flight enclosures for 3 weeks before release to reduce the shock of the new environment. Then they were set loose. And for the first few months, not much happened. The eagles scattered across the highlands, establishing territories, learning the landscape. Some died, which was expected. Juvenile eagle mortality in the wild hovers around 50% in the first year. But enough survived and started hunting. By fall of 2020, biologists noticed something in their monitoring data. Prairie dog activity in areas with established eagle territories had dropped by 40%. Not because the eagles were killing them all. Golden eagles can only eat so much. But because prairie dogs are prey animals and they know it. When an apex predator moves into the neighborhood, prairie dogs change their behavior. They spend less time foraging above ground. They stick closer to burrow entrances. Their colonies become more compact as they abandon outlying areas. This behavioral shift is called the landscape of fear, and it's one of the most powerful ecological forces that exists. Prey animals don't just react to predators when they're being actively hunted. They react to the possibility of being hunted. And that possibility changes everything. With prairie dogs spending more time underground and less time clipping vegetation, something remarkable happened. The grass started coming back. Not everywhere. Not instantly, but in patches across the highlands. Native grasses that hadn't been seen in decades began to emerge. Blue grama, western wheatgrass, Indian rice grass, species with deep roots that hold soil and survive drought. The second wave of eagles was released in spring 2021. Another 100 birds. By now, some of the 2020 juveniles were reaching maturity and pairing off. Golden eagles mate for life and defend territories aggressively, which meant the coverage area was expanding. More prairie dog towns came under pressure, and with prairie dog numbers dropping toward ecologically balanced levels, the vegetation response accelerated. Then the ranchers started noticing something weird. Their cattle were healthier. Body condition scores, basically the bovine equivalent of a BMI check, were improving. At first, they thought it was just a good weather year. But 2021 wasn't particularly wet. It wasn't particularly mild. What had changed was the forage quality. Here's the thing about degraded grasslands. When you have nothing but cheatgrass and bare dirt, cattle have to work harder for less nutrition. They walk more miles, burn more calories, and consume plants with minimal protein content. But when native perennial grasses return, the whole equation changes. Those deep-rooted species are nutrient-dense. Cattle can graze less area and get more out of it. Less walking means more energy goes toward weight gain instead of just maintaining body temperature and searching for food. One rancher, a fourth-generation cattle operator named Bill McCready, ran the numbers. His herd averaged 60 pounds more per animal at market weight in 2021 compared to 2019. Over 500 head of cattle. That translated to 30,000 additional pounds of sellable beef. At $1.50 per pound. That's $45,000 more revenue for a family ranch operating on thin margins. That's not just significant. It's transformational. But Bill was cautious. One good year doesn't prove anything. Could be a fluke. Could be a dozen other variables. So he kept watching. And in 2022, the trend continued. His cattle were heavier. The grass was thicker. And he started seeing something he hadn't seen in years. Wildflowers. When grasslands recover, forbs come with them. Wildflowers like lupine, balsam root, and prairie coneflower. These aren't just pretty. They're indicators of soil health and biodiversity. They attract pollinators. They provide food for species cattle don't compete with. And they stabilize soil even further. By 2023, Wyoming had released 350 eagles total. Not all survived. Not all stayed in the target area. But enough did that. The highlands now had an established population of roughly 200 golden eagles actively hunting across the region. And the ecological cascade was undeniable. Prairie dog populations stabilized at healthy densities. Native grass cover increased by an average of 35% in areas with eagle presence compared to control areas without them. Pronghorn fawn survival jumped from 20% to 48%. Why? Because the eagles were also hammering coyote populations. A golden eagle won't typically take an adult coyote. Too big, too dangerous. But juvenile coyotes, fair game. And more importantly, coyotes modified their behavior just like prairie dogs did. More nocturnal, spent less time hunting in open areas during the day when eagles were active. This gave pronghorn fawns, which are most vulnerable in the first weeks of life, a better chance to reach an age where they could outrun predators. Mule deer numbers started rebounding too. Wyoming's annual Big Game Survey showed a 12% increase in mule deer populations in the Red Desert Highlands, compared to a 3% decline in adjacent areas without the Eagle program. The skeptics who thought this was too good to be true started running out of counter-arguments. The data was there, the mechanism was clear, and perhaps most convincingly, the ranchers were on board. Bill McCready, the same guy who'd been skeptical in 2019, testified at a state wildlife commission meeting in early 2024. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you I love having eagles around," he said. "They're predators. They take lambs occasionally. But my grass is better than it's been in my lifetime. My cattle are healthier, and I'm making more money. If that's what it takes, I'll deal with the eagles." Other ranchers echoed the sentiment. The program wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, though at much lower rates than feared. The state wildlife department implemented a compensation program for confirmed losses, which helped. But more than that, the overall economic picture had improved so much that the occasional loss was absorbed by the gains elsewhere. The ecological story doesn't end with eagles and prairie dogs, though. Because when you start fixing a broken ecosystem, things cascade in ways you can't always predict. With native grasses returning, sage grouse populations started recovering. Sage grouse are what's called an indicator species. They need healthy sagebrush grassland ecosystems to survive. It means the whole system is functioning. And in Wyoming's Red Desert, after years of decline, sage grouse numbers were up 18%. Raptors beyond golden eagles moved in too. Ferruginous hawks, prairie falcons, even a few bald eagles started showing up. Diverse predator communities are more stable than single-species dominance. They partition prey resources, hunt at different times, and create overlapping landscapes of fear that keep prey populations dynamic but healthy. By late 2024, the reintroduction program hit its target, 500 eagles released over 5 years. The population wasn't at 500 anymore. Some died, some dispersed to other regions. But the highlands had a stable breeding population of around 220 eagles with territories established across the restoration zone. Biologists started using the Wyoming project as a model for other degraded grassland systems. Montana expressed interest. Parts of Colorado and New Mexico began feasibility studies. The fundamental insight was simple but profound. Apex predators aren't just nice-to-haves in conservation. They're functional ecosystem components. Their presence or absence determines whether landscapes can self-regulate or spiral into degradation. There's a term ecologists use called trophic cascade. It means effects that flow down through food webs. The classic example is wolves in Yellowstone. When wolves were reintroduced, they didn't just eat elk, they changed elk behavior, which allowed willow and aspen to recover, which stabilized riverbanks, which changed where rivers flowed. The wolves changed the actual geography. Wyoming's eagles did something similar. They didn't just eat prairie dogs. They changed prairie dog behavior, which allowed grass to recover, which improved cattle health, which made ranching viable again, which reduced pressure to convert more land to agriculture, which preserved habitat for dozens of other species. It's the kind of ecological success story that sounds too neat, too perfect. And in fairness, challenges remain. Climate change is making droughts more severe. Invasive species aren't going away completely. The highlands aren't returning to some pristine pre-settlement condition, nor should anyone expect them to. But what Wyoming proved is that strategic reintroduction of apex predators can jumpstart recovery in ways that decades of passive management couldn't achieve. The eagles weren't the only factor. Ranchers had to buy in. State agencies had to coordinate. Monitoring had to be rigorous. But the eagles were the catalyst. And here's the kicker. The whole program cost $8.2 million over 5 years. That includes capture and transport of eagles, GPS monitoring equipment, staff salaries, compensation payments to ranchers, and public outreach. Sounds like a lot, until you realize that the increased cattle productivity across the region generated an estimated $30 million in additional ranch revenue during that same period. The program paid for itself nearly 4 times over. That's not even counting the ecological value. Restored grasslands sequester carbon. They filter water. They provide habitat for hundreds of species. You'd be in the hundreds of millions. Wyoming released 500 eagles into overgrazed highlands. And what happened was a reminder that nature, when given the right tools, can heal itself in ways that benefit everyone. The ranchers win. The wildlife wins. And the landscape that looked like Mars, it's starting to look like Wyoming again. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos about unexpected conservation wins and ecological weirdness, hit that subscribe button.